Good evening, everyone, and welcome to EduTALK. EduTALK is a virtual talk show created out of the need for a global learning community, and we focus on topics that directly impact Caribbean nations and diaspora nationals working across the globe. And I'm joined by my wonderful guest here, Professor Rosalea Hamilton, and she is the founder of the Jamaica Institute of Law and Economics. Welcome, Professor Hamilton. It's very good to have you.
How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's good to have you on, and I want to get your views on some issues that are in our diaspora. We're working towards getting Jamaica to be a republic, and some things start with the education system, and some things start with the family, and other things start with policy. So we want to talk about ridding ourselves of colonial education, but want to get your perspective on what exactly is colonial education for the simple mind.
Yes. I think the best way to think about colonial education is to think about what the education system could have and did in fact look like during the colonial period. It was a system that was set up to provide limited education to as many individuals as was perceived necessary to perpetuate the status quo, to keep a colonial system of government in order. And it enabled a few people that it deemed as necessary to be the leaders of that system. And so what people call today an apartheid system of education was set up all the way back in the colonial era.
Yes.
So a few Jamaicans were able to get good quality education, and they were expected to step into the positions of the colonial administration and the leadership of the country to perpetuate what you were taught. For example, the leadership of the country in the hands of the British.
Yes.
Of course, as we know, part of the reason we're talking about constitutional changes is because the head of state is still in the hands of the British.
Yes.
And so, it would educate people who could eventually become governors, the governor general, and so on and so on. So that was the thinking back then. So the question is of perpetuating that system is, it speaks to what did we do significantly since independence?
Yeah.
How do we change that system from its very structure? And I think when we look at the system today, what we still see in 2025 is that the majority of Jamaicans do not get the same high quality level of education as a few schools in Jamaica like Immaculate and Campion.
Right.
Who consistently produce the highest levels of final exams at the end of the secondary school system.
Yeah. So what defined the status quo? You mentioned that the system was set up to maintain the status quo, and so we haven't changed much from that. What exactly is the status quo that was established and maintained?
So, of course, the status quo was a colonial system of government and an economy that benefited only a few. And it's important to note that this is not only true in our education system, it's also true in our system of government, and it's embedded in the constitutional arrangement. So we still have a lot of work to do to root out those core foundational colonial structures that are still in place today.
Right.
So we can talk now, not just the schooling system is set up there, it's still evident in what we see, but how we teach also is evident in the structure today. So there's still a lot of rote learning that's taking place in the classroom. And why is that important? Because back then it was important to simply follow the rules, follow the norms. Don't try to question it. Don't think outside the box. Don't be too critical. That was never encouraged. And so kids were schooled to fall in line and to follow what the teacher says,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Thank God there is no, infinite access to information on the internet and AI and so on, and a lot of that is changing very quickly. And the school system is still trying to adjust to that way of teaching and learning. But we still have in schools, especially that do not have the access to the technology and so on, especially in rural communities, the idea that the teacher is the center of knowledge.
Yeah.
So you still have a teacher-centric approach, and the rules, including rules about how to carry your hair,
Yes.
what, how to dress, all of these rules were linked to that whole order where the good education was about a student who knew their place, followed the rules, and did not question too many things. So
yeah, let me ask you, you mentioned the rules and the regulations in the school community. How exactly can, from this, because we are grassroots people, we tackle the problem from grassroots. At individual schools, what can they do in a community to sort of lead this change in the structure? Because a principal might look at you and say, but I'm doing what the ministry says. I have to do what the minister came on TV and the minister said this, so we're going to follow what the minister says.
Absolutely,
Not going to lead. So at the grassroots level, some of the things are what they can do.
It's an excellent question, because it raises the question of whether our educational system ought to continue to be centralized. Now, again, it made a lot of logical sense to have a centralized system in a colonial arrangement where everything was top down, everything was governance centric, central government centric, right? It's centralized. And so it made sense. It was just easy. The dictates came from the top and everybody simply followed. Now, if we're serious about changing not only our education system, but our system of government and governance to a more bottom-up, decentralized approach to governance and education, then your question becomes extremely relevant and important, because then it now forces all of us to think about what does a kind of grassroots, community-based, more bottom-up approach to driving learning and teaching, what would that look like compared to what we have? Now, it's quickly important, everybody can agree that you must have centralized rules. And the system is not going to work effectively and at its best if simply every single school or community does its own thing. Nobody's saying that, right? So we can agree that there's a role to set standards and, enforce certain key principles, if you like, and so on. That's important for the nation as a whole. But when it comes to a more student-centric approach to education, when it comes to thinking about teaching and an education system that is responsive to the needs of students, then we see a different role for communities, because we can quickly agree and recognize that students don't learn all at the same pace. And therefore, not just the role of the communities, the parents, the family members, and the shared responsibility for learning is now part of this
Yeah.
conversation.
So
So
you're
I
leading.
think a very important point. I do agree that communities ought to play a more important role. Parents ought to play a more important role. This teachers at the community level and members of the community almost wade in as to what each child need to maximize their potential.
And so the school needs more, it's sort of needing more personnel on the teaching and learning aspect of it, instructional leadership. That they need more personnel, like your social worker needs to. They need to be more social workers in school. They need to need more people to check up on students, not just their performance but their well-being, and they need to check up on parents too, and get parents to get involved. So let's talk a little bit about the mindset, because we talk about the structure and the people operating the structure. You mentioned policing, like the hair and so on, which we fight the effects of colonialism through the procedures, like, oh, go fix your hair, you can't come in here looking like that and so on, instead of looking at the individual and say to them, okay, they dress like this because of culture, because of their home culture, or because of some aspect of their upbringing. It doesn't affect their overall person and as a citizen. What sort of mindset are we looking at as we journey through this change with ridding ourselves of colonialism?
I think the first, Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley said it best: emancipate yourself from mental slavery.
Yes.
And I think that what the school system lacked is a course that teaches us how to emancipate ourselves from
Yes,
mental
I
slavery.
endorse it. I endorse
So,
it.
and I think, this mantra has been around for so long, yet there's a lot of confusion about what that means, because we all agree we need to do it. But
Yes.
what exactly is it? And so what you're talking about gets to the core of what it means. It means, for example, the mindset of a teacher or a principal who fits into this old colonial structure and simply follow back everybody else. Just do what, not uncritically and unthinkingly. So I think that's about emancipating your mindset. As a teacher, as a principal, wherever you are in this society, your obligation, if we want to change the society, decolonize, to move forward, move in a different direction, is to ask questions. Why? Why are we doing it this way? Where did this come from? Just the process of asking the question is part of that process of emancipating yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're simply not accepting the status quo. So I think that's the first thing that we all have to ask ourselves: where did these rules come from? Where did this behavior, this norm come from? And we begin to think critically about this. Let me tell you why that is such an important point. And as I said, Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley, all our leaders in the past who made this point was absolutely spot on.
Yes.
There is no, as we seek to develop an economy that is responsive to our people's needs and is able to generate the wealth that people can feel.
Yes.
So that it's not just a few people that are making a lot of money and the vast majority is simply trying to cope. We have to create and put into the global market competitive goods and services. And that those competitive goods and services can't be what everybody else is doing.
Yes.
It must be taking the approach that Bob Marley took and others, where they said, we're not just going to create music like the Europeans and try to outdo them and do better than them. That's their music. Let's create our own.
Yes.
And they thought outside the box about how to change the beats and create a new rhythm.
Yes.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
And that's the lesson for all of us. How do we think critically about what we're doing, how we solve problems, how we address things? And when we begin to ask those questions, why not do it differently? We begin to create innovative solutions to not only our problems, but to creating the kinds of goods and services that can compete in the global market. And
Yeah.
again, the story of what happened with Bob Marley
Yeah.
is a case in point. The
Yeah.
rest is history. He was able to sell to the world something novel, something new, and the world bought it.
Yeah.
Now, we need to do that across every aspect of our society, right? To find these unique solutions to our problems and to be able to produce these competitive goods and services. So I think that's why this critical approach to the mindset is key.
Yeah.
But there's also an important part of this shift in mindset that we talk about. People talk a lot about the importance of civics,
Yes. Yes.
and
Yeah.
having a sense of responsibility to society. I think actually it goes beyond simply civics. It goes beyond a deeper understanding of our role in a democracy,
Yeah.
in our role in a society that has been struggling for over 500 years
Yeah.
to break itself free, to enable us not just to be free thinkers, but to free to pursue a self-reliant development path that enables us to achieve our highest potential, to lift the standard of living of the majority of us. Now, that kind of understanding of our role is very important. Why? Again, if we go back to the colonial era, we didn't have no talk, the country run, right? We don't have no talk. That is way beyond our head, right? Somebody else was making decisions about policy and law and those lofty things. But we're after 63 years of independence, we're
Yeah.
at a point where our educational levels are generally higher than what we had when we started independence. But our consciousness about who we are as a people now is at a point where we could do it then, but
Yeah.
it's even greater now, in a position to say we are ready to chart our own future on our terms. If we weren't convinced back then, because somehow we felt that you had to have a certain caliber of education and so on before, then I
Yes.
think we, after 63 years, recognize that it's not just about education, because you can get the wrong education. You
Yes.
can come out of the education system and you do nothing to develop the country, to take it further. And again, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, the early musicians are excellent illustration of what is possible, even if you did not go through the school system.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, they actually have to do it on their own without the
Absolutely.
school.
And in
Yeah.
fact, it's an excellent contrast, because
Yes.
their message in their music
Yes.
is also about saying, listen,
Yeah.
if you can educate yourself and still is in chains,
Yes.
you still
Yeah.
can't free yourself from the bondage that our educational system has
Yeah.
is set up. So again, the kind of education where we consciously put in the education system information and courses and programs that deepen our understanding of our role, not only in a democracy, in
Yeah. Yes.
achieving democratic outcomes, but
Right.
also in achieving the specific historical outcomes that we want, given our particular history.
Yeah. What do you say about the people who would say, we're governing ourselves? You will see we have black people across the Jamaica and the Caribbean. We're governing ourselves, and life is good. We don't have anybody telling us to go back to our country, or you're not welcome here, or you can't lead us because you're not one of us, and so on. They would say, this is not colonial, like what are you talking about? Life is way better than 50 years ago, or 70 years ago, or 80 years ago. What do you say to those people?
Well, let me say that human progress is not linear. you know, and the values we had back then is different than the values we have today. The standard of living we had back then is different than the standard of living. So back then, many of us would be very happy and would see ourselves having a very high standard of living if we had running water in our homes, if we had electricity in our homes, if our children was able to wear shoes to go to
Yeah.
school,
Oh, yes.
etc.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? I mean, for many of us, that's a lifetime away.
Yes. Yes.
But today, that's not a sign of progress. That's just a sign of normality. Normality.
Normality. Yeah.
You know.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Now, you know, a higher standard of living is about, you know, owning your own home, being able to drive a car, being able to have access to the latest technologies, and so on and so on. Back then, those were not necessarily priorities, you know. Certainly the technologies didn't exist, and so on, and cars didn't exist, and so on and so on. So it's important to say that we have progressed. We are better off than we were in 1962, I would say the majority of Jamaicans, with respect to living standards. But when we compare ourselves with the rest of the world, we have a far way to go.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Caribbean too, because Jamaica is one of the lowest paying country for teachers in the Caribbean, just in the Caribbean. And I was wondering, why can't we do something about this? If so much, and the other part of it too is developed nations are, I want to call it brain drain, but they're using Jamaica and other Caribbean islands as this ground zero for training educators and taking them out of these developing nations into America and England. And the Middle East is catching on to it too. But we're seeing where we're still talking about our teachers as if they're not professionals. You know, it's shocking. But the eloquence of the teachers and the vibrant educational attainment that they have and the way we treat them in Jamaica is very different from, even though they're not getting much more after they take out the cost of living and so on in America or Britain. They're not paid a whole lot more, but they feel like they're contributing more and gaining more out there than in Jamaica.
Absolutely. I mean, I lift my hat to the teachers because they literally turn them hand and make fashion every day.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they make the best with the very limited resources that they have at their disposal. And the progress that you've seen, I see in the many stories of principals that come into a school and within a few years completely transform the school.
Yes.
You know, and so I lift my hat to the teachers for doing the best that they can, given the limited resources that they do have. And so I think you're absolutely right. There's much more that we ought to be able to do to pay them better and to provide better working conditions. And to ultimately continue to show the kind of appreciation that is absolutely needed.
Yeah, let's wind down, Professor Hamilton. I want to talk about just briefly the Advocates Network, because I know you're doing a lot of work. You have your regional nonprofit one. I'm trying to be there in person. I'm not sure if the in-person can happen, but I will be virtual if the in-person cannot happen. Tell us a little bit about the work, because you're doing it in Jamaica too, trying to get equity and justice for people, actually balancing governance in Jamaica and making sure that accountability works.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Advocates Network.
So the Advocates Network are, you know, a set of Jamaicans that I would say patriotic Jamaicans who are very much concerned about human rights and governance in our country. And so what we tend to do is focus on the issues that we see are inconsistent with good governance and certainly don't comply to what we see as the human rights standards that are required. So, for example, we're talking about the, hair in school and so on and so on. That's part of our advocacy. We actually wrote the Minister of Minister of Education, prior to them writing a hair and dress code, highlighting the need to address this issue. And, you saw over time, the ministers had to come out and say very clearly, listen, we absolutely don't want the schools to policing, students here and so on and so on. And so leaving a lot of discretion in the hands of the school did not quite solve the problem.
Right.
Because we still hear the schools setting their own standards that have not essentially remove the problem. And so the question of, that issue of the kind of educational system that we need, we have tackled issues having to do with broad questions of governance. Many of us have been very, very concerned that we go into an election very soon, and there are at least 8 members of parliament or former members of parliament that are being, up to the time when they were members of parliament, being investigated for illicit enrichment. We've never seen that in the history of our country. And very significantly, we've never seen the kind of questions and investigation that are being leveled at our prime minister as he goes into an election. And the idea that somehow all of the issues that have been are being investigated and being questioned that were evident in the Integrity Commission report. Somehow the idea that all of those are witch hunts or, not credible and so on it goes beyond credibility and belief. And I think that what ought to have happened is that in the face of this investigation, the Prime Minister and all the other members of parliament should step away until these investigations have been concluded. And the idea that we are now setting a new precedent that you could have a prime minister who is being investigated, have not been able to get this certification required under law, to demonstrate to the public that they're in good standing. The idea that that could be pushed aside and somehow it's business as usual is not very credible. And also the idea that you're challenging the very law that is being investigated as well. So there are many issues like that we have brought to the attention of the public, and we've said, listen, this is not consistent with good governance. Right? We have a court of law that ought to settle these issues, ought to be settled there. And until then, we go back with the normal functioning of a society where until you are found guilty, then we will work with you. But now that we know that you're being investigated, as is done in many companies and even public bodies, where if you're under investigation, you're asked to step aside until that investigation is complete. So there are many, many issues. The fact that, for example, members of parliament are not willing to sign a code of conduct is troubling. What is that code of conduct? That code of conduct is a promise to be ethical, to be honest, to be selfless, to, display the kind of ethical leadership that we expect, etc., etc. Those kinds of commitments to the society, it is troubling that we do not have members of parliament that are now vying for office, prospective members of parliament who are not prepared to commit either in writing or verbally to constituents. That's what you're going to vote for, somebody who's honest and selfless. Those are troubling issues. And so there's several others, and the Advocates Network have been at the forefront of it. We're talking about, for example, salaries for teachers. We were very much leading this national protest against these unconscionable salaries that the politicians got relative to our civil servants like the teachers. And, you know, the fact that, for example, we're going into an election and these matters are still not settled
Yeah.
is truly troubling.
Yeah. For years. They keep on passing it on.
Yeah.
Oh boy. It seemed like it's the era for madness, across the world. It's
Well, you know,
crazy.
I think what happens is, you know, in every society, there are people who will pursue interests
Yes.
and interests that trample the interests of others.
Yes.
And I think that when you look at our history and history of human beings, you see that tension. You
Yeah.
know, those people that you may want to describe as good and those people you want to describe as bad.
Yeah.
But it usually is people pursuing interests that are in conflict. And
I like how
so
you put
so
it.
and so for every generation and every society, what is important is that we stand for, be
Yeah.
willing to fight for, and
Yes.
to pursue the interests that we believe in.
Yes.
And if we are godly people and we believe in godly principles, then we define those principles very
Yes.
clearly and
Yeah.
we live them and hold others to those standards.
That's very good. I'm glad you said that. It's true. It's very true. And the way you put it is very important because it's interest. It's always about our ego. It's what we want to accomplish for ourselves.
Right. And I
And
mean, if we look at the good book, I mean, both the
yeah,
Bible and others, you know, we talk about pursuing self-interest as
yeah,
a, you know, loving others, and so on before yourself. And I think those are important principles that have existed for ages and
yes,
that have
yes.
guided society. I love the African concept of Ubuntu. I
Ubuntu.
am I am because you are because I am. It's a very important human
Yeah,
kind of concept about how to coexist.
yes,
We
yes.
can't coexist as humans if we don't see each other, not only as humans, but see each other in each other. So I am because you are. So when I see you, I see me.
Yes, yes. Powerful.
So it is these kinds of, if we believe in these kinds of principles, then we have to not just live for them, but we prepare to die for them. And I think if we look at what we've seen in Jamaica now, it's the same issue. Are we fighting for principles to make life better for others? Or are we pursuing principles and activities that enrich ourselves?
Yeah, yeah. It seemed like it's the last one.
Yeah, a lot of it is
Yeah.
that, but I want to encourage you by saying
Yes,
there are Jamaicans who are fighting for
yes,
principles that will support and accrue benefits to others and not themselves.
yes, yes, very much like the Advocates Network. Thank you so much, Professor Hamilton, for
Thank
coming
you
on.
so much for having me. Always
Yeah,
a great
always.
opportunity to talk with you and wishing you all the best and continue
Yes.
your excellent work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And your work as well. I know you're very busy and holding up for people. I mean, it's remarkable. Everybody, this has been EduTalk. Please, if you want to write to us at edusolutionsintl@gmail.com. That's edusolutionsintl@gmail.com. Or visit our website at edusolutionsintl.org. edusolutionsintl.org. We will see you next week with another edition of EduTalk. Well, good, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.